our next speaker is Dr. Erik, and he is the CEO of TMMi Foundation. His talk is about software testing, building on success beyond the obvious. So I would like to welcome Dr. Erik, and the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you. Let me first see how I can share my slides. That works as well. Okay. I assume you can all hear me. Thank you very much for the invite. And the next 45 minutes, let me talk about building on success beyond the obvious. Let me first explain what I mean by that. I've been in testing for over 25 years, or in quality if you want. So a long time. And I have seen practices that really work and make a difference. Okay, so I want to talk about not how to be perfect, but how to be, I would say, good enough, whatever that means. And beyond the obvious reflects the fact that I'm not going to talk about hypes or about test automation. It's going to be different things I will discuss. Now, how do I get to next slide? Yeah. Okay, before I start, I've started, of course, but this is something I have come across recently several times. I was talking to in a conference in Australia, and Elizabeth Henderson was there. Who was one of the, I think, agile persons, and she said, "Oh no more testers, because in agile we're all the same and whatever." I was in the States, where James Whittaker of Microsoft was saying, "Oh, we're all shifting right, and we will not have any testers anymore in Microsoft." I was at a conference in Holland, where Rini van Solingen, a famous doctor, local, also very much from the Scrum and Agile era, no more testers in the future. And this made me think. So no more testers. I will come back to that statement later in our presentation. At the same time, saying no more testers, we have, I think, many challenges. And I guess I don't know situation in Africa or Middle East that much in detail, but I think you will probably recognize many of these things. The systems we are making today are much more, I would say, important to the business than they were, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. And we're in an age called digital transformation. The systems that we are developing are very complex. New technologies. We're never testing one system anymore. It's always a system or I would say, group of systems. The software has to work on variety of devices and OSs. Security. And it's not like, oh, there's all these challenges, but you get all the time in the world. No, time to market is critical. It has to be done yesterday. So I think we are in a phase where we're seeing many challenges for testers and for testing. This was a poster from a project I was involved in recently. It's German. It says, "Gib niemals auf," and it means never give up. And to be clear, the frog is a tester. So it shows you, I think, where we are with testing today and the challenges we're facing. And I always say, if you don't believe me, start following a regional newsletter, a regional news site. And I'm doing one in Holland. I don't expect you to read Dutch or understand Dutch, but the word softwarefout means software defect. And what I've put in here on this slide is very much just a few examples. Thousands of prisoners released early because of software defect. Medication shortage during Corona at pharmacies and hospitals because of software defects. Uber accident, software defect. Hundreds of Americans taken away from their home for a bank, software defect. 911, sorry, this is 112 in Holland. Defect. So what we're seeing is that this is the world we're living in. We are living in a world where software defects are all around. And the strange thing is, you think about this, as I said, I've been in software testing for many, many years. You would expect that we're all doing the things that were being taught in all these courses. But to my surprise, all over the years, I'll come back to this slide in a minute, I'm seeing people are not using test strategies. People are not developing, writing good test plans. The test design techniques, which we are being taught at conferences and at courses RSTQB, are not applied. Reviews, few. Test automation, looks successful. Reasonable tests were hard to find. Testers often not trained for the job. So this is the world which is strange. On one hand, we are seeing all these challenges, and we're seeing that defects are everywhere. On the other hand, many are not applying the things that we know already for many, many years. This is strange. Which brings me to a paradox. And don't get me wrong, my presentation will go into a much more positive mode in a minute. And the paradox is that systems are still released. Sometimes a bit too late. Budgets are being overrun. Quality level not good. And at the time they are released, the managers go like, oh, we can never have this happening again because it is. However, 1 month down the line, they forgot about it. So apparently, I'm saying apparently, we are releasing systems too late. Budget overrun. Sometimes too many defects. But if managers really care, they would act. And in many circumstances, managers don't really care. So what I want is I would say, good enough system. So my presentation is not about how to be the best tester in the world, but how to be good enough and survive. Because that, I think, is what this is about. And this is, unless you work in a safety critical environment, typically more than enough. So I'm giving you on the next slides 5 basic practices to be lean, if you want, in testing, to have agility in testing. One of the things that I've seen in my 25 years that actually make the difference and make you be able to survive, instead of saying we need everything from our courses. Because people don't apply the things which are in literature. People don't apply the things which are taught in courses. This is sad, but this is honest and open. The first one, and the first, I would say, core practice that you should always think about. Risk-based. Interesting enough, already in 1983, that's a long time ago, Bill Hetzel wrote a book. It was called The Complete Guide to Software Testing. And he already stated, testing is always risk-based. What I mean by that is that you always, and I'm sure also in Africa, also in the Middle East, you always have too little time for testing. So make sure you define for the testers, for the team, for the agile team, very clear, unambiguous testing priorities. That's what we're trying to do. Make sure everyone knows and understands. And the nice thing about it, you can even map that to agile. Huh? This is about communication, about collaboration with customers, about talking to them, what's more important and less important. But the first thing to do is get real risk-based testing implemented. And to be honest, in the teams I work with, many people talk about it, but if you ask a typical tester, so what are the most important parts of test? Do you have a common view across the team? Quite often not the case. So we're talking about having, let's say, product risk sessions. I'll make a few comments about that in a minute. Talking about risk-based test approach. So that if something is more important than another part, what does that mean? More important. How will be tested differently? And preferably, if you do risk-based testing, you also do risk-based tracking. That means you can go back to your business and say, these are the risks that we identified initially. And this is their status. Because risk is much more a business language than defects are. Excuse me. The first thing, of course, is how you set priorities. And I'm not going to have a full risk-based testing course, but I think the main thing is to first of all, don't make it too difficult. I like it very much when you say, okay, we need to test the following user stories, the following requirements. Let's take those as a basis for our risks and have a informal or formal sometimes risk session that analyze those for impact and likelihood. And this is important. Impact and likelihood are very different elements. Impact means how important is it for the business? Things like safety. How often is it used? Is it visible for the external world or only internal? And likelihood is about what are the chances of defects? New technology, how complex? How many interfaces? And some people start saying, oh, but then the risk is impact times likelihood. I very strongly disagree here. I think impact and likelihood are two different, if you want, elements. Should be treated differently, and just multiplying them means you lose information. So much better, I think, risk is a function, if you want, of impact and likelihood. And my goal is always to get, because I like that very much, I like to visualize, I like to communicate, to get something like, I call it a product risk matrix. On one hand, impact, business risk, likelihood, technical risk. And here you see 4 classes. There are some which are high for business risk and technical risk. And probably these need to be tested to the most intensively possible. And some are in a medium category, where this medium is different than this medium, and some are low. But the main thing is, if we get something like this, for an agile sprint team for the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or a release, we all know, and we agree upon that, what are the most important parts to test? Where should we focus and spend our limited resources? So risk-based testing is about basically creating something, communicating, and we all know where to focus. What is most important to do? Not the product owner knows, not the tester knows, we all know, and we have the same view. As I said already, it's not only about creating a product risk matrix, that's one step. It's also about creating, I call it a risk-based test approach. Because anything which is in this area should be tested differently. There's something in this area. And this comes from a project I was involved in, pick and place machines. And they're saying anything in this area, we will always apply software test design techniques. Things like equivalence partitioning, decision tables, or whatever you are using. We will review, because review is also a way of finding defects, our software design. Not test design, our software design. The tester will support unit testing. The tester will review unit testing. This is a, you might say, a very, very strict approach to testing. In that area needed because high likelihood, high impact. If we then move to the other side, low, as a contrary, we said, or I said in this project, anything in the low area, we cannot afford all these things. We will actually go for exploratory testing. So only exploratory testing is good enough. So you can see here very clearly also, there are different ways here, that not only are we focusing our risks, we're also making sure that when we have risks, what does it mean for the tester and how is the test approach different? And the great thing about this slide is basically, I think, it's almost like your one-page test plan. You can print it, put it on the whiteboard or whatever you have, and you get something like, oh, sorry. Ah, here he is. This is your test plan. Here it says, these are the most important parts of the test. Your risk matrix. And here it says, in this area, this is the test approach. In this area, this is the test approach. This area, this is the test approach. I see test plans, and I'm sure you've seen it as well. There are 10, sometimes even 20 pages. A lot of information, but this vital information is missing. So for me, IEEE 829 or ISO 29119 or whatever they're called, they're nice to have, but this is the essential of testing. These things, once this is in place, that has added value. And as I'm saying, I'm trying to give you 5 ideas that you need to dig in. 5 ideas for you to work on, say, hey, this is interesting. We are not doing risk-based testing, but if you're doing it, make it practical and make it something that works. It has added value. My second core practice is, to some extent, not a spectacular one. It's even sometimes perceived as being old-fashioned. Reviews. But you can see here already all the practices which I'm now presenting, this one, next one as well, is about shifting left, making sure we move to trying to find the defects as early as possible in a software development process. I think we've all learned over the years that these are much, much more effective and efficient to solve. So also for reviews is don't start reviewing everything. There are still documents, even in an agile context, but do it, perform limited on those parts that are most important and most interesting in the project. And most interesting, most important means perhaps related to the high risk items. So give priority to those things. Hey, this is an important part. You are making a software design for a high risk part of the system. Let's review that software design. Again, what you're seeing is reviews, mapping it to agile. This is about communication, about feedback, customer collaboration, because you can work with the product owner and say, hey, here are the user stories. Can we have a session together to validate those? Are they correct? Are the ones you have? Would having those in place make you more happy? Again, going back to Bill Hetzel already said, testing is not only finding defects, it's also preventing defects. Because we're preventing defects in this way to occur later on during dynamic testing. But also if you do reviews, make sure you apply in such a way that it makes a difference. And I'm not going to review a full course, but a nice statement comes from Mr. Tom Gilp. He says, it's simple, but not easy. It's a nice statement. And I've been lucky enough to be able to implement reviews in several organizations. And we'll be able to show, measuring very defensively, that for every dollar or every euro, I don't know what you have in Egypt or in Africa, that you put in there as an effort, the return on investment is easily 1 to 2. So suppose there's a machine outside, you put in a $10 bill and gives you back $20. I think you would all leave the room now and go to the machine. So doing reviews sounds simple, but if you look at it, it has some rules, and applying these rules makes a difference. And I was given in a project recently. I was sent by email, by the way, sent a document. Document was 50 pages, and it was saying as instructions, please review this and back by Friday. I had no clue why, what the objective was. Doesn't make any sense. However, if you start thinking about reviews, train moderators, apply roles, meaning ask a person to look at it from a different perspective. Because if you have multiple perspectives, you find different defects. Do you have checklists? Perhaps a kickoff to explain the objective. Not too many pages. You can't review anything beyond 20 pages. It doesn't make any sense. There's so many metrics already showing that these reviews are not effective. And I can go on. There's a lot of things to explain. The reviews is something still worthwhile looking at. They make added value, and especially also, as I said already, we are shifting left. Find defects early. But also, when you do this, understand the difference between a walkthrough, an inspection, and technical review. There are different review types for different objectives, and make a difference. So we talked about risk-based testing as a core practice. We talked about reviews as a core practice. And the third one I would like to mention here is unit testing. Again, we are shifting left because we're getting developers to do unit testing. In projects I've involved in, developers are typically, and many of you are in developing, I think, highly skilled people who understand the system, who have a lot of knowledge. So if you want to improve your testing, get developers to do unit testing, real unit testing, where they measure things like code coverage. I like very much code coverage, not saying, oh, I've tested it. What have you done? Well, I've tested it. No, you should be able to show you, oh, I've achieved X%, 80% statement coverage, or X% decision coverage. Wow, that makes a difference. And if you get unit testing, I would say, up and running, later on during system testing, UAT testing, you will not find the easy ones anymore. The input quality is so much higher already. I'm also a big fan of buddy testing, XP, meaning that if you have two persons, that's let's say Erik, I'm doing development, and my buddy is called John. I'm developing, and John tests my software, and when John is done, I test his software. It's a very simple measure. But as a result, there is independence, and as a result, we are finding more defects. It's these little things that makes a difference. Of course, some people think unit testing means test-driven development. I'm not against test-driven development, but it's quite an expensive way of doing unit testing. And to be honest, I haven't seen it being used that often. People talk about it all the time. And in conferences, you hear all these stories. But at my clients are probably not mature enough. So I'm forgetting about test-driven development. I'm not saying it's not good, but it has to be worth a while. And maybe if you're in a safety critical environment, it's worth the investment. If not, I would go for, I'd say, more practical solutions to get unit testing done. By the way, if we're talking about unit testing and we're talking about getting developers into testing, we should also train them. Many people often complain about developers, they're not testing, but they have never ever been trained in testing. And that's not fair. Again, let's say a very simple process slide. What we're thinking about is we have design. software design, and developer produces the code. Then his buddy, remember, this is Erik, I'm running the code, and John, my buddy, is designing test code. Independence. And we run the test. Now there are two things that matter. First of all, there's a functional check, meaning that is the output from a test correct, as expected? If not, let's assume the code was wrong. But the second check I like very much. Did we achieve the level of coverage that we want to achieve? Did we get, let's say, 80% statement coverage? And this, I've been a developer myself in the past. I did unit testing. I had no idea what I was doing. If I would have a tool that will actually show me, hey, Erik, you haven't got these lines of code covered, and give this feedback, that will be hugely appreciated. So get developers using unit testing, but think about body testing, think about code coverage, tooling for that. They make a difference, and developers know a lot. To me, testing is not only for testers, it's for the whole team. Number four. So we talked about risk-based testing, reviews, unit testing, and my practice also, again, is test design. And I'll try to explain on the next 2-3 slides what I mean by test design. And again, it's shifting left. It's doing things as early as possible. It also means testing is about finding defects. There are test design techniques available. Maybe you're familiar with them, maybe not, I don't know. But don't start applying them as they are written by the books. Think, what is the best way? What is the most smart way to apply them? Such that I can find more defects using them. That's what this is about. And again, think about if you do it well, and you have a sort of test design phase where you identify what are the most important parts to test based on the risks. You can talk about it with your customer. And also, when I talk about test design, I'm not talking about test cases. I know many organizations say, do you have tests? Yeah, I got so many test cases. Do you know what you've covered? I got no clue. What's the traceability requirements? We don't. That doesn't make sense. Try to come up with what I think is a sort of test design phase. In between, let's say test planning on one hand, and the other hand, test case development. We'll talk about in a minute about applying what I call a test design startup meeting. But also use some of the test design techniques that I know, classification trees, use cases that are very easy to read, easy to understand for customers, for the product owner, for the business analyst, so they can actually review those and provide feedback. We're missing this test case. Oh, why is this not involved? And of course, I'm a big fan of exploratory testing. It's actually focusing on trying to do the things that matter. And explaining a little bit more, I mean, what test design is maybe go through your user stories, your user requirements with a marker and say, this is what I need to test. This I need to test. This I need to test. So you identify, I call them test conditions, maybe test situations, but also make sure you have traceability requirements. Because requirements change, which conditions change, which test cases change. And this, by the way, is also applicable to test automation. This is vital. But I also like it when people have their test designs in these kind of let's say, diagrams. Why? Because they're easy to understand. And easy to understand means you can review them. You can share them with the product owner and business analyst. And if you have test cases which are all detailed, nobody understands. except the tester. And the same here. This is based on a technique called equivalence partitioning. I'm sure you are not familiar with the terminology, but here you see terms, and here are the things, valid values, invalid values, you test. And the great thing about having tables like this is basically one page. You know, it's good to one page. Again, one page is good to share, to review, to discuss. Keep it simple, people, but do the things that really, really matter. And this is what I mean by a test design startup. Maybe, and again, going back to risk-based testing in the beginning, if you consider in those areas where it matters, where it's important, where the impact is high, where the likelihood is high, you say, okay, we need to start writing test cases. Let's sit together for 10, 15 minutes only and brainstorm together what is valuable to test here. I call that test design startup meetings, where there is a developer, maybe another tester, experienced tester from a business owner, and together we make these kind of diagrams. It seems like a very simple thing, but it works because we're getting the knowledge from other people to help us, the testers, in becoming better at testing. That's what we're doing here. A test design startup meeting. And I mentioned earlier, exploratory testing, maybe you remember. And of course, if you have this in place, this could even be an input or part of the test charter that is used in exploratory testing. Which brings me to my fifth practice, or maybe not a practice, I don't know, but I think the fifth thing which has made the difference in my experience is people. Nice thing, again, going back to long time ago, early books, 1979, Myers, testing is extremely complex, intellectually challenging task. Build experienced and skilled testers. They make the difference. Invest in training, but also in training on the job. Invest in sharing experiences. Make sure that there is something like continuous learning. And today, we are talking about teams much more. So don't think building experienced and skilled testers only applies to testers. It also applies to a business analyst doing testing. It also applies to a developer doing testing. And when you're talking about training, it's not just, oh, let's send them to a 3-day course and we're done. No, training on the job. Share experiences. And even, I like that very much. Unfortunately, we don't have the time for that to discuss, but team dynamics. We build teams nowadays, agile teams. We want a tester, here's a tester. We want a developer, here's a developer. Not a developer, architect. And we build the teams based on the technical skills of people. It would be great, and I've seen, I would say, examples where it's very successful, that you not only build teams based on their technical skills, but also of who they are. Maybe you heard about Belvin profiles. You have things like a resource investigator, a finisher, so that we have different people in the team that together make up of a great team. It's also part of this. So my if you want, my slides are pretty dense with information. There's a lot of things which belongs to this practice. And today we're going to talk about tester skills. And again, as I said already, this is not only for testers. We're talking about the T-shaped concept, of course. T-shaped means, of course, a tester needs to understand testing. A deep knowledge on testing. I don't know how popular ITIDA is in your context, but you could say things like ITIDA play a role here. But in addition, we like people to say, but some development skills are necessary because you're working in an agile team and I want you to do some other things, some other tasks. Requirements engineering, writing acceptance criteria, scripting, if you're doing something on test automation. And of course, domain knowledge, also an important one. Who are the users? How is the system being used? And I worked for Philips Healthcare for quite a while. And in Philips Healthcare, every tester is sent to hospital twice a year. Not because they are all ill people, no, to observe how the system is being used by the hospitals, by the end users. You learn from that. And based on having more domain knowledge, you can build better test cases. And of course, all kinds of soft skills, communication skills, being open-minded, presentation skills. As I said already, this is about sharing experiences, best practice libraries, coaching, workshops, continuous education. That's what this is about. It's not about sending someone to a training course 3 days. Okay, this one is done. No, there's much more to this one. It's continuous learning. It's doing all these things all the time. Having a best practice library in place where you say, you want an example of a test design? Here's a good one. And maybe it will not be the best in the world. I don't care. It's the best in your organization. Have sessions once in a month where you say, let's share some experiences. I've done this in a project. Let me discuss that with my colleagues. Again, it may not be the best example ever, but it's good enough in your context. Learn, 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 learn. So what I've been talking about for the last, I think, 43 minutes now, so I have 2 more minutes left, is creating what I call a lean testing toolbox. Things that I think make a difference when you are testing in a project. It may not mean you are the best tester in the world, but I think too many projects, that if you get these things in place, you are able to survive and do let me put it, I can't find better words for that. You are doing a good enough job and management is happy. We talked about clear testing priorities, risk-based testing. Now we all have the same focus. Effective reviews, not just doing reviews, effective, do them in the right way on those parts that matter. Get developers doing unit testing. Body testing is one I'm very fan of. Code coverage measurements, another one. Use test design techniques, but use them as a supporting tool to find more defects. Apply test design startup meetings. Maybe the output of the test design startup meetings can be the starting point for exploratory testing. And finally, last but not least, invest in getting more experienced and skilled testers. And again, this is not sent into one training, but this is continuous learning, doing these things that matter. Which brings me back to my opening slide, or almost opening slide, where I said, you have people now who are stating, we will not have any more testers in 5 years and 2 years or whatever. And I'm involved in software testing for a long, long time. And I've heard these statements every time again. I've also shown you, I think the world we're living in is IT is vital to a business. It's vital to business success. So for me, it's not no more testers. It is probably, there has never been a time where software testers were needed more. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Erik, for sharing this practical experience in doing software testing with us. They seem simple, but I think it needs one to be smart to act them and get the most benefits out of them. Now the floor is open to receive questions to Dr. Erik, if anyone have questions. Yeah, people are sending questions on the conference platform, so can you, Erik, reply to them?
Yeah, I will.
Thanks for your time. And are there anyone want to share any questions? Okay. Okay. So
May I also do share? Okay, is it possible? I think on my last slide there's also an email address. So it's Erik at erikvanveenendaal.nl. Erik at erikvanveenendaal.nl. If you have any further questions afterwards, feel free to send me an email. I'll try to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.